Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, October 17. I'm Herman Green with your midday news. A special welcome to those of you watching online at onespotmedia.com. A new ban on lead in paints. The Caribbean Poison Information Network, CARPIN, says it is pushing for that action, even as it urges the Jamaican government to put legislative measures in place to regulate exposure to lead in the atmosphere. CARPIN was addressing a recent Jamaica Information Service think tank session. TVJ's O'Shane Masters has more.
The World Health Organization, WHO, estimates that in 2004, lead exposure was responsible for 143,000 deaths. Speaking at a JIS think tank session on Tuesday, head of the sub-regional office at the United Nations Environment Program UNEP, Vincent Sweeney, says there were significant deaths due to lead exposure 3 years ago.
A study by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation has estimated that in 2015, exposure accounted for almost 500,000 deaths due to long-term effects on health, with the highest burden in low and middle-income countries. The same study also estimated that lead exposure accounts for 12% of the global burden of idiopathic intellectual disability, 2.5% of the global burden of ischemic heart disease, and 2.4% of the global burden of stroke.
The WHO says lead exposure also contributes to mild mental retardation and cardiovascular disease. Mr. Sweeney also pointed to a link to criminality.
Lead exposure takes a serious toll on communities that also imposes socioeconomic burdens, reducing economic growth and driving up crime and other forms of conflict.
It's why coordinator at the Caribbean Poison Information Network, Sharika Whitelock Balancing, says CARPIN will be requesting a ban on the use of lead in paints in Jamaica. She says it will help eliminate the effects of lead on children. She pointed to a report from the WHO which shows that young children absorb 4 to 5 times as much lead as adults.
Another focus in regards to lead in paint is the lead on the toys itself. And we believe that if we can restrict lead in paint, we can protect children through these different avenues. So we will not have the leads on the toys, and we will not have decorative paint used in homes or in the schools or on playground areas where children are.
O'Shane Masters, TVJ News.
Cabinet has given its approval for funds to be paid over for the rehabilitation of thousands of streetlights across the country. They have also indicated that an information and communication technologies policy is coming to guide the use of gadgets in schools, including phones. Our reporter Dwayne Anderson was at the post-cabinet press briefing this morning as the announcements were made and has this update.
Thank you, Herman. Good afternoon to our viewers on television Jamaica as well as those on onespotmedia.com. So the post-cabinet press brief concluded a short time ago. Several issues were outlined, among them the government's plan to address streetlights across the country. The government says some 12,000 streetlights across the country are not working properly. And as a result, criminals are using these dark spots to commit their acts. The government doesn't like it, and as a result, they've set aside some $7 billion to address that. Also explained in full at this press briefing is the government's plan to pump some $30 million into the Tablet in Schools initiative. Now, this is important because only last week the Minister of Health, Dr. Christopher Tufton, outlined his desire to see a policy addressing the use of technology in schools, which is to address what he calls the technology addiction among students. I asked the Minister of Information, Senator Ruel Reid, if this plan by the government to continue pumping funds into the Tablet in Schools initiative will in any way clash with the minister's plan to see a policy looking at technology addiction. He said that it is no problem. They can both coexist, and so it will be interesting to see how this unfolds going forward. So these are just some of the issues here at Postcab. We will delve into them further in Primetime News, but until then, it's back to you, Herman.
Thank you, Dwayne. An apparent lack of communication between stakeholders attached to the road improvement works at the Portia Simpson Miller Square in St. Andrew continues to hinder progress in the area. On Tuesday, another business operator in the area complained that unannounced excavation and new barricades halted production. Chief Technical Officer at CAC 2000, Colin Roberts, explained that company and staff vehicles were not able to enter or leave the office grounds. He said an emergency meeting was held with the National Works Agency and a check to establish timelines for works and changes.
I wouldn't say that much was resolved in that meeting. It is clear, though, that a plan of action in terms of our individual property and when the fence will be relocated, the pit will be relocated, and the guardhouse needs to be put into place so that we can have proper access to the premises.
Because of the unplanned obstruction, the delivery of containers from the wharf has also been put on hold. The business community has been complaining about the lack of communication and the level of uncertainty which continues to stifle business.
Customers whose air conditioning breaks down, and they require us to respond within a timely fashion. And if we can't even get the service truck out of the yard to go to the premises to fix their problem, our service level is compromised, and we can't allow that. We haven't gotten any retail customers in the last couple of months because of the issues of access. This is a very business unfriendly environment for customers to come and do business.
The Hagley Park Road Improvement Project is to be completed by August 2019. A community in Clarendon has created its own version of the national No Dirty Up Jamaica campaign aimed at getting persons more involved in keeping their surroundings clean. Vice President of the Longville Park Citizens Association with responsibility for the environment, Rosemary Lagoth, says the move was taken even as the community, deemed one of the largest in the Caribbean, continues to grow.
So you now have to say me nah dirty. And therefore, if you not dirty up your community, what a wonderful place we would have in Jamaica, in not dirty up my community. And if you not dirty up my community, then not dirty up Jamaica. So we want to help that slogan in persons owning the responsibility to clean up and to respect self, then you will respect the environment in which you live in.
She says the Citizens Association is also seeking to partner with the National Solid Waste Management Authority to better manage large household waste such as old appliances, which sometimes litter the community. With the rampant increase of domestic violence in Manchester over the last few months, TVJ News has learned that funding to deal with cases of that nature is non-existent. The details in this report.
The Manchester arm of the Social Development Commission, SDC, is reporting that it has received no funds to have intervention programs for persons in domestic disputes. The revelation was made by Parish Manager for the SDC, Beverly Booth, at a meeting of the Manchester Municipal Corporation recently. She was responding to questions posed by Councillor for the Belfield Division, Mario Mitchell.
As it relates to a programmatic space, the CSJP program, they say, is not qualified for Manchester because we are not deemed a volatile parish. We do not fall into the quartile 4 of that program. Hence, we don't get funding for such programs. But we do our best as much as possible.
The SDC parish manager further pointed out that it was a decision of the National Security Ministry not to provide such funding. Ms. Booth says according to the Security Ministry, Manchester did not fall within the parishes deemed to be in need of such funding. This, she says, is based on the number of reported cases of domestic violence in the parish. But Councillor for the New Green Division, MacArthur Collins, rebutted those claims.
Where I get information is not corrected. You need to correct. In 2015, coming to 2016, Manchester were leading in violence. Manchester were leading in domestic violence. So to go back to the drawing board, that were put out by the Minister of Justice. So any person or person giving that information need to go back to the drawing board and get information correctly. Manchester is deemed as a problem now. The last information received from the superintendent showing that the biggest problem in Manchester now by statistic is domestic violence.
With that revelation, Mayor of Mandeville, Donovan Mitchell, made this request.
It is better to do the input now than to wait until things get out of hand before you start to do the things that you want to do. So we may have to have some additional meetings or inquiries from the Ministry of National Security or the other agencies to see what can be done, because we know these areas, the police know some of these areas that have the tendency to become violent.
O'Shane Masters, TVJ News.
We go on to news overseas. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has met with the Turkish president to talk about missing Saudi journalist Kamal Khashoggi. This amid fresh allegations in the Turkish media that the journalist was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. We have more in this report.
The last-minute mission to find out if Saudi Arabia ordered the killing of a Washington Post journalist, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was all smiles and seemingly jovial as he greeted Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the man increasingly suspected of masterminding the murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Turkey, both men playing the diplomatic card.
Thank you for hosting me. That's a show.
Pompeo held a brief first meeting with the elderly King Salman and then the Crown Prince, the de facto ruler of the kingdom. Pompeo flew over 12 hours for less than 1 hour of discussions. The State Department called the meetings direct and candid.
In private, he has got to impose the reality on the kingdom's leadership that this is an incredibly serious issue.
And here's a preview of what's coming up in, well, we don't have time for that. We'll go to sports. Jamaica's Reggae Girls could create history on Wednesday with victory over Panama at the CONCACAF Championship. Both teams will play for a spot at the 2019 Women's World Cup in France. Karen Madden has our preview.
The Reggae Girls, who danced through their Caribbean opponents, are on the cusp of a history-making appearance in next year's World Cup, but must get by a wily Panama team in Wednesday's third-place playoff to secure the final automatic spot. The Reggae Girls were beaten 2-0 by Canada in their opening group game and then surprised Costa Rica 1-0 before dispatching Cuba 9-0 to earn their semifinal spot. Panama defeated Trinidad 3-0 before being thrashed 5-0 by the United States, but bounced back to shock Mexico 2-0. Both teams went down to heavy defeats in their semifinal, with Panama being beaten 7-0 by Canada and the World Cup champions, the United States, handing the Jamaicans a 6-0 defeat. But all that is behind the teams, and the focus is now completely on grabbing the final automatic spot for France 2019. On the disciplinary table, both teams have featured for their aggressive style of play, with Panama having the most yellow cards so far with 6, and Jamaica recording the most fouls with 42. Not much separates the teams in the CONCACAF rankings either, with Jamaica ranked at 7 and Panama at 10. The Jamaicans will be hoping first-choice goalkeeper Sydney Schneider is at her save of the game best, as she was against Costa Rica after being rested in the Cuba game. University of Tennessee senior Khadijah Bunny Shaw will also need to be at her prolific best and hope for support from the hard-running Trudy Carter. Assistant coach Anja Price says the team is in a confident mood and not even the cold temperatures will damper their spirits.
We decided to go outdoors today despite the weather conditions because we want to simulate the conditions that will be obtained for tomorrow's game at 4. So we had a very lively session outdoors. And, we really went through a lot of the drills and things that we want to do tomorrow. And the girls are in great spirits. Temperature is about 46 degrees, so it's a bit cold, but they adjusted very well. And that's one of the reasons why we really force ourselves to train outdoors today and not indoors, because we want to really get them used to the conditions that we'll obtain for tomorrow. And they're rearing and ready to go.
Jamaica have scored 10 goals in the semi-final round to Panama's 5, and the hopes are high that Wednesday's game will put them a spot in France.
There are no real injury concerns, just a little niggles, but I believe that everybody's available and rearing to go. We know it's the most important game of the entire tournament, and it's a must-win game, so we are mentally and physically prepared, and we just want to go out there and do our best so that we can qualify for France 2019.
The loser of Wednesday's game will have another chance of making it to the World Cup when they face Argentina in November. Karen Madden, TVJ Sports.
And we actually do have time for a preview of what's coming up in this evening's Health Report.
In the next edition of the Health Report, we look at a degenerative disease known as ALS.
What happens at the beginning, you might have difficulty in speaking, or things might drop from your hand. And people might think that it is myasthenia gravis or some other condition. There's no definitive investigation that you can do to prove it. So it's usually by exclusion and by watching the progression of the disease.
That's the health report this evening in Primetime News. And now for today's healthy living tip. Stay social. Go out to lunch or dinner with family and friends. Go to physical and occupational therapy. This will help to maintain strength and flexibility. Watch out for symptoms of depression and seek help if you need support.
And that's the Midday News. I'm Herman Green. Join us at 7 for the Primetime News Package. On behalf of the News, Sports and Production teams, good afternoon.